Welcome back to Remotely Serious. My conversation in this episode is with Lily Bruns. She is a digital nomad, but also a digital nomad advocate and researcher who has thought about things like digital nomad visas and countries on the internet and new ways of structuring passports. So I had a really good time talking to her, and I hope you enjoy our conversation. Let's jump in. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Remotely Serious. I'm here with Lily Bruns. We're going to chat about digital nomadism. We're going to chat about you've got a lot of different projects, but
Yeah.
I kind of want to jump in really quickly. I've told, I can't remember if I've told this story before, but like there's the movie Walk Hard, and there's a joke at the beginning which is like Dewey Cox, the protagonist who's like playing a
Mhm.
Johnny Cash character. It's like Dewey Cox needs to talk about his entire life before he goes on stage. And I find that a lot of podcast episodes can take that form where you kind of spend 20 to 25 minutes talking about someone's biography. And that's like,
Mhm.
that's great. We've done your whole biography. Now let's talk about something. And I actually don't want to do that. I kind of want to jump into like right into it. And one of the things is you are a digital nomad advocate, and you among many other things. But one
Mhm.
of the things, the reason I kind of got to know you is that you've done a lot of great work working on a digital nomad visa research and advocacy, but specifically an ongoing, and you can jump in and tell me where it's at, but an ongoing digital nomad visa white paper. Do I have
Yes.
those facts correct?
Those facts are indeed correct, sir. Yeah. It's kind of become, I don't know, a running joke. I think sometimes when something is so intense, like the only way to deal with it is to have humor. It's become just like this thing in my life that I was like, someday it's going to be done. Someday, ha ha ha, not
This is
stressful at
this is your
all.
Moby Dick. It just goes on and on. Your
Yeah.
infinite
Yeah.
jest. Yeah. So where is it? When did you start it? The project?
So probably first had the intention to write, to sort of share my knowledge and research about digital nomad visas in like 2019 when I started on this advocacy journey, just in Thailand, just in the very Thailand specific context. And then it sort of just ballooned from there. Um, but I've been working in earnest on this with my co-author Leanna Lee probably for the past I guess. Okay, so my baby is now 16 months old, and I was pregnant when she and I started collaborating on this. So however long
So
that is, I guess
someone
like
can do the
almost
math.
two
Yeah.
years. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Um,
and
mhm.
where have you been? But where are you now, and where have you been since Thailand? Maybe you can't count all the places if you've been
Yeah.
nomading, but generally, where have you been in the last eventful? In the world
Mhm.
of digital nomading, it's been eventful with the great pandemic. I guess it's what is it 2023 now? So it's been 3 or 4 years.
Yeah. Yeah, I was bunkered down in Chiang Mai, which is like my hometown where I'm from and spend most of my time. So most of the time was there, but let's see, I was in Virginia, which is where I grew up for a while, and then yeah, back in Thailand, mostly in Chiang Mai, sometimes in Koh Phangan, and very lately, I've just been visiting family in North America. So I'm in Vancouver for the first time. It's beautiful here.
You're
It's a
in
very
Vancouver right
different
now?
environment. Yeah, I'm in Vancouver right
Oh, I'm
this
I'm
minute.
probably like 15 minutes away by helicopter. I'm in Victoria on Vancouver Island right now.
Oh,
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, this part of
Yeah.
the world is gorgeous.
It is
Uh,
nice. That's what they all say when people come here. Isn't it
yeah,
beautiful? The mountains. Yeah.
it is. I was
Yeah.
walking through the forest yesterday. I was like, oh my God, this feels like a magical fantasy land. When are the elves going to walk out?
Yeah.
Where's Elrond? Yeah. So we had a little brief pit stop in Tokyo right before this, but yeah, I'm pretty sedentary these days. It's mostly with the baby, but yeah, life is based in Thailand, and I go around visiting family. But yeah, I joke that I'm kind of like a fake nomad, sort of
Yeah.
dabble in this world.
Yeah. No, there's definitely a lot of that. And I think it's totally healthy where it's like, I'm a digital nomad, but yeah, I've been here for 8 months, whether it's
Hmm.
Thailand yeah, I'm a digital nomad, but I've been in Lisbon for 12 months straight,
Yep.
which is totally okay. It's an inclusive community. But it's really is over these last few years where, 2019, there were no so-called, and we'll get into the so-called part, but there were
Yeah.
no so-called digital nomad visas in 2019. And then in 2020, along with everything else that was going on, a trickle of countries, maybe on the surface adapting to what was going on with the pandemic, but
Hmm.
also, sort of nothing to do with the pandemic, just adapting to the fact that remote work would have happened anyway, with or without the pandemic. But you saw Caribbean islands, and then Estonia, and then more Caribbean islands, and then eventually, fast forward a year or two, and 50 plus countries have announced some form of a digital nomad or
Yeah.
remote work visa. And part of your work seems to have been parsing what they're trying to do, and coming to some conclusions. At least, you can share it with me, but it looked like you were grappling with the fact that digital nomad visa might be a misnomer. They should be called remote
Yes.
work visas. So what has that journey been like what have you learned examining and comparing and contrasting all of these nomad visas from around the world?
Yeah. I think that like funny little breakdown of where I've been and what my travel style is actually a great segue into this because um, people talk about digital nomads as if people have a set travel style, as if that means one concrete thing, right? But it's kind of this collective movement that has many diverse members who have very different travel styles. Some people are, they're doing the digital nomad thing for many years, and they're perpetual travelers, and some people are more like they're just location independent but actually like to be based in one place, but they just sort of like having the option and flexibility to travel, right? And so when we hone down on the whole visa thing, it's like who are you actually talking about? And my big frustration when I started looking at this topic was that there was so little information about who a digital nomad was supposed to be and like how that was being communicated to governments. Governments don't really have a lot of data, and a lot of them have had trouble, I think, sort of really getting into the community and understanding who a digital nomad is supposed to be. And I kind of don't blame them because we are such a diverse group, and that's a difficult question to answer. So I think when I set out to write the white paper, that was kind of like part one of something really important that I wanted to address. Like, hey, let's sort of have some common understanding. Let's use some common vocabulary of who a digital nomad is. What are some of the defining characteristics? What are some of the movement patterns of folks who live this lifestyle, so that we can kind of paint a picture for governments, for policymakers, because if you don't know who you're creating policy for, then how is your policy going to be effective, right? So that's kind of been my mindset coming into this project, and looking at the like whole global mobility landscape for digital nomads, remote workers.
Yeah, and it seems like the digital nomad visas, that they've created often are more of a extension or flavor or genre variant on the concept of, a long-term worker visa, a permanent
Hmm.
residence visa, where it's like we acknowledge that you have income that comes from elsewhere outside of the
Yeah.
country, because you can go on your laptop and make money. Money comes in from someone outside of our country, because that's the first hurdle, is that
Hmm.
immigration is, for hundreds of, not maybe not hundreds of years, but since World War II,
Yeah.
the sort of the national borders are there for many reasons, but also to protect the local jobs of a country and not have
Hmm.
local people get jobs and opportunities taken away by people who parachute in from other countries. I'm not saying I agree with this or whatever, but that's sort of
Yeah.
one thing that is very, top of mind for politicians, is protecting their voters, because
Hmm.
their voters are the locals, not necessarily the people that
Yeah.
visit for a year. And so it seems like the core thing is these are remote work visas. For example,
Hmm.
I'm trying to think of a good example, but maybe, the ones in Spain or Portugal, maybe some of
Yeah.
the ones in Southeast Asia, they have been conceptualized as, I don't want to paint them all by the same brush, but it's
Hmm.
kind of like, come here, you get a year, you should be making at least 2 grand a month or some number, and we expect, you may or may not have to pay tax, but you need to kind of sign up for this process, submit all of these
Yes.
things, maybe do a criminal record
Yes.
check, and then we expect you to come for a year, and then maybe you can renew for another year. But it's certainly not enabling, oh, you're going to be here for 6 weeks quickly, and then you're 6 weeks in
Yeah.
Mauritius, and then 6 weeks in Lisbon, and 6 weeks somewhere else. It's not really enabling that, which is a common path of many digital nomads, is not
Yeah.
to spend a year everywhere, it's to spend a month everywhere.
Absolutely. There's kind of a fundamental incompatibility with like the freedom and flexibility of digital nomadism and what that lifestyle is supposed to be about versus how governments view immigration, right? They kind of have a couple of different statuses. You're a tourist, or you're maybe a temporary resident. You have like a business visa or some other non-immigrant visa, or you're an immigrant, or you're a permanent resident, right? And digital nomads don't really fit into any of those. So I think the issue with the visas is, a lot of the countries that were trying to move quickly were adapting something that they already had to try to capture this new target population, right? And I think that's why you get some of the issues with, in my opinion, we don't have a true digital nomad visa. Nothing that really fits what I think are the defining characteristics of a digital nomad person really like maxing out that lifestyle. But what we have are an array of remote work visas.
What are some of the elements of a digital nomad visa that you
Mm-hmm.
think are missing? Like if there was top one, top two,
Yeah,
that just classically, the classic elements that aren't there that you wish were there in
yeah.
an
I
ideal nomad visa.
I think the number one criteria is that if you have a visa that requires someone to commit to a destination, even if it's for a year, but like to commit to a destination, you're making them not a nomad. So to me, that's like a no go. Like is a commitment. Like I think like maybe 6 months is sort of reasonable and kind of compatible with like the sort of um, slow travel vibe that a lot of digital nomads go for. But like a year is a stretch. Like anything longer than that, and like, come on, that's not a digital nomad visa. You are basically targeting someone who by their travel style, by their mobility style, which is very loose, very flexible, and you are removing that defining characteristic by telling them that they have to commit to a place. And so, especially if you have a visa that has any criteria around like if there's like only a single entry visa versus like a multiple entry visa, if there are minimum days required for you to stay in that country, then that's kind of like bonkers. And that's not most of the remote work visas out there don't have that criteria, but a handful do. And I feel like it's just a little bit like crazy making, because yeah, you define your target population by their movement style, but then the very act of making them jump through the hurdles to get this visa removes them from that class of person. Right? Do you sort of get me?
Yeah.
This is kind of like crazy making.
Yeah. It sounds like they all suck, and they are all lacking on that front. On the front
Yeah.
of making, we got a long way to go to enable kind of the vision for nomads. I think there's a couple
Mm-hmm.
things going on. There's enabling what nomads are doing, with moving around and not committing, but also I think acknowledging the fact that I don't want to be ageist, but let's say a 25-year-old nomad may say, this is what a nomad is. I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
travel everywhere, and then realizing when they're 31 or whatever,
Yeah.
or never, but let's say when they're 31 or later, that it's like, actually, no, I did want to sample some of these countries, and I do want to have,
Yeah.
you know, education system, driver's license, social security, a hospital near me, maybe not in their home country, but
Mm-hmm.
that they do actually want to sort of um, commit, for lack of a better
Yeah.
word, eventually. And sort of, I think in an ideal world, we would support, there would be a global utopia that kind of
Yeah.
supports people that are on whatever phase of the journey they're at. And we kind of still only support the people that are ready to kind of emigrate, as opposed to the
Commit.
nomads. So
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, though, that they all suck and they're all lacking on this dimension. But was there any of the many announcements and the many visas that are in various stages of being
Mm-hmm.
live or under legislation or whatever, is there any that stuck out as like the best among a rotten lot that kind of were good, or
Yeah.
stuck out?
I guess I have a couple of favorites for different dimensions. I don't think any one of the remote work visas that I've analyzed. So I have this whole like database where I've like put them all together so I can sort of like figure out what's going on in common with them, like sort of compare, contrast. And a couple stand out for like, I maybe it's just because it's nearby in Southeast Asia. So I like Malaysia's approach. I think they've done something clever there, where they have really sort of honed in the community aspect. They've got a fairly they've got a very reasonable like minimum income requirement, and it seems, I don't have direct experience on like the application process, but it seems fairly straightforward to figure out if you're eligible and then to apply for it. And as far as the target country, I think Malaysia's got a lot of what the community are looking for. And again, on the community side, they're like, hey, we know that you're coming here not just you're people who are digital nomads tend to want to be around like-minded folks, and we want to encourage and cultivate that for you. And so I think that's very front and center with their program. So I think there's some like good notes to take there. And from what I've seen of Costa Rica's, which is still very new and emerging, but they sort of like they've made an announcement last year, and I think a lot of folks were disappointed, but then they came back and they sort of adjusted those criteria, which I think is really like, that's really awesome, to take feedback and like do something with it, to make it a lot more flexible. So I think those are two that are on my radar to watch, but I think they're still very new and we haven't had a whole lot of uptake. So I think everything is still a bit up in the air.
And is it true you have I don't want to say worked for, but I'll say worked on Plumia? I say that because it seems like more of it's a concept, as well as I don't know if
Hmm.
it's even a company as much as just a project.
Yeah.
But the aim of Plumia, um, is, for people that haven't heard of it, I'll summarize it a little bit, but you could probably
Yeah.
correct me or guide me. Um, it is a concept and a community
Hmm.
that is uh, somewhat decentralized, but is generated, or sort of the brainchild of Safety Wing, the health insurance company,
Hmm.
among other things that Safety Wing does. But Plumia is essentially it is a more of a moonshot in terms of global mobility, in that it seeks to create kind of a world where you can have a digital passport instead of the you know dice roll of whatever country you happen to be born
Yeah.
in is where you get your passport. Now I'm Canadian, so I have a passport from Canada. I could change that, and I probably could have gotten an American passport, but that would be that was really hard. I lived in the
Hmm.
United States for a short time, and that was hard to do and involved lawyers and was not easy at all. And so there are people that are not in Canada, the United States, all over the world, in other countries, and all of these countries have different. Um, it's like you have different powers. If you're in a certain country, you might not
Hmm.
be able. If you're in Russia, things are going to be really hard. If you're going to be in India, you're in India, things are going to be harder in a different way. No,
Yeah.
no passport is equal. And why do we do this to people? Why do we, when a baby is born, why are they born with these restrictions? It's the way it is. But Plumia is aiming to change that.
Yeah, so I've been involved with Plumia for a long time. I was just a big fan of like the concept, and I was really fascinated by this idea of creating a country on the internet. I think a lot of folks are doing that from a very like decentralized DAO focused way, but the folks at Plumia, I think it's a gathering, this community of folks who are really nerdy about this topic, folks who like me who really just want to create some impact in this space, to sort of see the potential of the remote lifestyle as like a world changing force for good. And so they've done a really great job of attracting folks and supporting folks like me who want to sort of harness that energy and do something. But they're like internally, what they're working on as the Moonshot Project is to create like the Nomad Border Pass. So it's kind of just like, okay, let's rethink like passports, right? Like rather that, because it's, you sort of alluded to this whole idea of like passport privilege, and that goes back to that earlier discussion of like, oh well, who is a digital nomad? Well, that question is kind of constrained by who can become a digital nomad, right? Because if you have really good digital nomad visas, then many other people could become digital nomads. You ask the question of like, what are the countries that digital nomads come from? Well, they tend to come from the countries with strong passports, right? But if we can totally change the game, that can look very different. So what Plumi is doing, they want to basically create like they they want to sort of have maybe like one application to multiple countries so that their quote unquote like internet country citizens can have mobility rights akin to what your national passport would allow, but your membership to Plumia and the passport privileges that you get don't come from your accident of birth, but rather joining into this community. It's like an opt-in system.
Yeah, no, I love to see these projects move forward, and I participated in a Plumia cohort earlier
Yeah.
this year, which was um, it's a lot of things, so I don't want to make it sound smaller than it is. It actually is quite a lot of conversations,
Oh
but
yes.
essentially it was like joining a Discord and chatting with people. But that kind of it's more to it than that. But that is
Yeah.
essentially the mechanism. It was decentralized, and you could
Hmm.
jump in and tackle these kind of open source or open
Yeah.
ended and open source projects. And the thing that I find, and just this is my personal opinion, may not reflect the opinions of anyone else with these things, is I love following Plumia. I also follow various network states and
Hmm.
sovereign cities, cities on the blockchain, various projects that are emerging. And often, it may be tied to land, it may be not tied to land at all in terms of, and I'm not saying Plumia is like these other projects where they're looking to, start a new city
Yeah.
with blockchain governance. The thing that's exciting is, on the one hand, I love that we're rethinking the way that countries haven't really changed since the 1600s or
Hmm.
1700s. We had a few democracies. I was talking about this on the last episode of this podcast with another guest, but we had a few democracies start. America and France had their revolutions, and then you know democracies popped up everywhere. We got rid of kings and queens around the
Yeah.
world. Lots of detours around colonialism and communism and fascism, but eventually 50, 75, 100 countries were democracies by the end of the last
Yeah.
century. And we haven't really changed much. Like, it's even a democracy now has like the constitution, the parliament where people sit, and it resembles the Westminster Parliament that was invented by the English, and et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of that hasn't changed in hundreds of years.
Yeah.
The details might change, but the actual governance hasn't changed. So that's great. That part is good. Like, rethinking that, figuring out how to build a
Hmm.
new kind of country city. I love that. The thing I don't understand yet is kind of the nation state now is a thing that actually has some good kind of backstops and safety
Yeah.
precautions
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
legal systems built in. So what I don't, and I'm going to kind of make a facetious example, but you go to some Mediterranean island where someone has used a blockchain DAO to source some land and gotten a zoning law where this is a new sovereign country and all of our citizens use token, et cetera. And I'm not trying to make fun of this. I'm actually interested in this.
Hmm.
And everybody shows up, and maybe there's a population of 3,000 people in this new city. And I'm not trying to pick on any city, but it's often an idea like this. And then everybody gets together for conference day one. We're building things. We built some buildings. We have our blockchain based laws. And then at one point, two people get drunk and get in a fight, and someone breaks someone's arm, and they're lying on the ground. A thing that I have some friends who are police officers
Hmm.
in my hometown, and like, stuff happens every night. Stuff
Hmm.
happens in a city, in any jurisdiction. Shit
Yeah.
happens every night. And so what happens then? It's like you go to the mayor of nation of what's you go to the mayor of network state town, and you say someone's got
Hmm.
a broken arm, and I just picture the mayor being like, I'm gonna be a bit pejorative, but like a crypto bro that's like, oh crap, we don't really want to deal with this stuff. Like, we want
Yeah.
to have like libertarian bank accounts and Bitcoin bank accounts and not be taxed. And someone has a broken arm, like, oh, we didn't really think of this. Like, and I know that I'm kind
Yeah.
of making fun of it, but that's my like thing, is like, cities and states and provinces and nations have all this civil and criminal case law and law and enforcement and all this stuff. And it's like, what about that stuff? Like, what
Yeah.
about all that?
You kind of have like, if you boil down the digital nomad movement in some way, it's almost just like Braveheart, just like there's somebody at the top of a mountain just shouting freedom. But
Yeah.
then it's like, wait, but what's the other side? Like, what about responsibility?
Yeah.
What about commitment? What
Yeah.
about
What
like
about
community? Like,
justice?
yeah,
Yeah.
it's like,
Civil
okay, like
litigation. Yeah.
freedom and independence sound great, but the thing is, like, we humans are social creatures, and in order to like peacefully live in this planet together, we have to have like mutual obligations, right? So I think that that's something that's really, I think that's what intrigues me about this kind of work, and this community building, this kind of advocacy, is like, hey, we sort of are in this like big paradigm shift, right? Like, we're seeing like a huge shift in the world order, And there's a lot of opportunity in that. Like, let's rethink, like, in a world where people can shift across borders much more easily, where the place that you're born may not be the place that you end up, where you may, sort of use these remote work visas to kind of date a couple different countries perhaps before you decide like who you want to get married to in a way, right? And commit to long terms. Like, what do we want those relationships to look like? There should be some sort of form of like reciprocity, right?
Hmm.
And maybe you want to make it like really fast and loose, so those are like light commitments, more like dating, but surely to have like a good world where you have a tax base, where you have people who like aren't just trying to geo arbitrage and like pay as few taxes as possible. You actually have people who want to invest in the place that they're at, right? They want to invest in the community with their taxes, with their efforts, with their entrepreneurship. Like, this is, I don't know, like this to me is like the really interesting space where like let's figure out not just what like maximum freedom and flexibility is, but like I have all of these options for who I want to commit to, how I want to commit and invest my energy. And if I can like live and work anywhere, yeah, what kind of relationships do I want with the places that I go? In this place, I may be a visitor, right? And I might just be a tourist and I'm hopping in and out, and we're not going to have a long-term relationship, right? But maybe a couple places I really like going back to. And so I want to have like, I'm open to a bit more of a commitment, a little bit more of an exchange. I want to give back. I want to receive more from that community, right? And then like in this place is like my base, right? It's like, and I'm going to invest the most in this particular community because I think we all want a sense of home. So maybe this is like very conceptual, but like this to me is like the really like interesting stuff. I've been like, I think it's because I have a baby now. I've been really like digging into like psychology and like development, and just really thinking about the human brain and how we sort of like evolved and adapted. My background is in anthropology. And so in this moment, in this like modern world where we have like digital technologies and people can travel anywhere and we have digital nomads, like I'm kind of fascinated, like, hey, can we work backwards to like the fact that like borders used to not be a thing and we used to live in like clans and tribes, and the fact that this kind of movement might be enabled again, like can we like draw on some like ancestral wisdom and like, yeah, so much shit happened between like the foundation of the nation state and the creation of like passports, right? I think we have this opportunity to sort of like work backwards and say like, okay, what really worked about all those things that we learned about nation states and capitalism and economic development, and what lessons do we want to keep? And maybe like now that we don't have some of the forcing functions, because like the economic monopoly of cities has been broken by remote work, right? Like in order to advance
Yeah,
economically and
definitely.
prosper, you do not have to be based in a city anymore. And that's the paradigm shift. That's the shift. You don't have to be based in a city in like the West, right? In the developed world. And so now that we've broken that, what are some of the things that we can like maybe rethink and rebuild from the ground up? I've talked a lot,
Yeah.
but,
No, I
but
think
that's
that
like so juicy to me.
the it's a common theme in literature and in society about the tension between the move to the city post-industrial revolution and then
Hmm.
some pastoral life that we're leaving behind. And every
Yeah.
century, every decade, there's some version of this, whether it's a writer or something that kind of, what if we just went back to nature? Whether it's
Hmm.
Into the Wild, the beach, Thoreau, or all these different tropes in literature about how like if only we could go back. And so now I think enabling people to simply have the choice whether they want to live in the
Yeah.
city, the suburb, and the city, the suburb, or some existence that resembles more of the ancestors agricultural, or simply even,
Hmm.
I don't want to say hunter gatherer, but literally there are, we probably won't go that far, although some people might be into that. But there's versions where we can live, and it's not just more and more densely packed into cities and
Hmm.
the monopoly of the downtown. But I'm actually curious. I think you were mentioning, we've talked about passports, multiple passports, digital nomadism. I hear a lot of commentators and influencers and creators, um, many of whom are male, and they talk about,
Hmm.
getting multiple bases. So
Yeah.
multiple, you mentioned the concept of home. So multiple homes, let's call it that. And, diversifying and being a nomad, or being an individual who can spend time in different continents and different countries, and not being necessarily super rich in order to do it. It's sort of a middle class globally
Yeah.
mobile
Yeah.
lifestyle. And they're often talking about it for their various reasons. And so I think many of these people I listen to who are male, don't have the perspective of being a mother with a child. So I'm
Hmm.
just curious if you have a perspective on home, and would you envision somewhere where your child or children have um, multiple homes, like we
Hmm.
consider, Thailand, somewhere in Europe, and somewhere in North America, all equally home? Or do you find yourself thinking like, I should make a choice, I should double down on one
Mm.
place now that the situation is different? And I know it's kind of a personal question, but I really do want to. I'm tired of hearing all these dudes talk about what you should do with your life, and I just want your perspective.
Yeah, I think like the whole, because you sort of alluded to like flag theory and geo arbitrage and that whole thing, right? Something that the super rich have always had access to. Like, how
Yeah,
can I like set up entities and to be in the countries where I'm treated best, right? And I think it's really cool that that kind of thing is accessible to people who don't have to be super rich. If you're just clever, you can like hack the system. But the thing about hacking the system or gaming the system is that it ends up being a race to the bottom, right? And one of the things that I sort of want to touch on with my work on like nomad visas is this topic of like income tax, because we saw what happened when a lot of countries started incentivizing like for corporate income tax, and we had a race to the bottom where all of a sudden like, wait, if this company is like managing all of the savings because they're incorporated in such and such place, and that place is collecting lower taxes, like surely we don't want the same thing to happen with all of these remote workers, like trying to pay as little income tax as possible, because good things can
yeah,
come from taxes. The fun thing about being in like North America right now versus Thailand is, my husband and I have been having lots of conversations about parks and libraries. And like Thailand is a wonderful place to live, and it's definitely where like we want to raise our family, but Thailand is not a place where there's a lot of infrastructural development in these kinds of things. And so yeah, I think about that topic of like taxes and investment. So I think if you ask me like as a mother, as a woman, I'm kind of like, I think I want my child to grow up with the best of all options, right? But I want her to actually, the funny thing is I want her to be rooted in a way that maybe a lot of folks aren't now. I really hope that she grows up and she wants to stay at home, because I like ran away from my family, for many years, and that was really fun adventuring. But selfishly, I kind of like, oh, if I can just like create a really great community around her, maybe she'll never leave me. I want her to have life experiences and all that, but I think that we've lost something in sort of this. We kind of teach our young people to go out in the world and we let them leave us, but we've sort of diminished the social fabric because we do that. I love Thailand, but I'm having a hard time sometimes with raising a family because my own family isn't around, right? So I don't know, I've wandered around a lot of topics here, so maybe you can bring me
yeah.
back,
No,
Curtis.
no. I think that you bring up a good point. I think there will be this evolution. It's a generational thing, and there are more and more nomads, and then more and more people who have the complete freedom to work remote. And over the next 10 or 20 years, I think we'll absolutely see the return to the home country. So there will be all kinds of people
Yeah.
who say, you know what, like I thought that it was paradise
Hmm.
for a variety of reasons in Thailand or Bali or Lisbon or Madeira. But and I'm North American, so I'll just take this perspective. I won't speak for like a European or Asian or an African
Hmm.
perspective, but there will be North Americans who say, I just want to go back to my neighborhood in
Hmm.
Toronto or in Tampa or in Southern California, and just like I want the little league game nearby. I'm saying for kid, maybe
Yeah.
for oneself, but I think
Hmm.
specifically driven by people settling down and having families. I think there's something that about rootedness that won't change just because there's a
Hmm.
globe. I don't think most nomads will have their kids in a different place every 2 months forever. So
Yeah.
we'll see how that happens. There'll be kind of this 10 years from now, we'll have so much more perspective on like, okay, how many nomads continued nomading and how many went back to their home country. But I also think we'll
Yeah.
see new places around the world that become rooted, settled, new places with
Hmm.
nomads becoming oh, I don't want to use like colonial language, but they'll be like not settlers, not pioneers. Won't use those words, but like people who are I know, settler, pioneer, gentrifier, all bad words or words with not bad words, but they're
Mm,
words with connotations. But there's some word for like the reconfiguration of, oh yeah, this community
right.
popped up in this part of Portugal or this part of Croatia or this part of Malaysia, and there was a big hub of remote work expat,
Yeah.
let's say, families actually, and one would hope merging and mixing with local culture and not being like an enclave that's completely separated. So these new communities that are, in
Yeah.
20 or 30 years, you might have a school and there's kind of this blend of kids, let's say in 2040 or 2050, there's this blend of kids where some of the parents are remote worker millennials
Hmm.
that are now 40 and 50 and 60, and the kids kind of even don't, they don't know about all that. They're just living together and they know that
Yeah.
the new community is. So I don't know, to what extent that will happen. There's lots of people trying to build cabin communities, remote work destinations.
Yep.
There's city planners who are trying to rebrand their city to be, whether it's Dubrovnik or Buenos Aires or other places. There are people where the tourism board has, spun off a new department and said, okay, well, now we're the digital nomad and remote work board, and go get the remote workers to come here. And I think, with these visas that are not really digital nomad visas, but like stay here forever visas, some of them will start to work. So I don't know what that's going to look like. And,
Yeah.
but we'll see.
If
Yeah.
we
Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, if we go back to that discussion about visas, right? Like in my analysis, kind of looking like what's your playbook? Like, what are you actually trying to do? Because are you familiar with like the South Park underpants gnomes? There's this
Yeah.
like
Like
show that like my
something,
business school
something
professor
question
taught me.
mark profit like that.
Exactly. It's like
Yeah.
underpants, profit, right? But like,
Yeah.
how did the underpants turn into profit? And I think countries sort of see digital nomads as like, okay, these people, highly mobile, mostly young, they're smart, they have digital skills, they have money. Like, we want them to come, but like, but why do you want them to come to your country? Like, create policy, create a visa that is coherent for your objective, right? Because if you want these people to come because they're tech talent and you want to support your startups, then why the like how is your visa not like allow local work? Like, why are you restricting against that when you actually should be incentivizing for like knowledge exchange, right? And if you want people to relocate, right, you're one of those countries that has all these rural villages. Like you hear about these like schemes in Europe where like, oh, this house or this whole town is available to purchase for like €1 if you commit to such and such, right? Like, okay, so you
Yeah.
want to incentivize for that. You want to incentivize people to come settle. Don't brand it like a digital nomad visa. Like, create a program that's like, don't do a bait and switch, right? Like, just create a program that's like for remote workers to come to there for this objective. You need to sort of pick the reason that this like young, tech literate, highly mobile population are can connect to your country's like economic objectives, right? And draw the line correctly. And sometimes that may not be a visa even. So this is where I think things like get so confused.
Yeah. Yeah, it reminds me of kind of in the 2010s and even earlier in the 2000s and maybe even earlier than that. There was always these things where there was always there were these initiatives where cities were trying to be Silicon Beach, Silicon Mountain,
Yep,
Silicon
yep,
this,
yep, yep,
Silicon
yep.
that. And it was always like they had one out of the four ingredients. So oh, we have office space or we have
Yeah.
nice restaurants or something, but it's this complicated thing that made Silicon Valley what it was, where there was,
Mm-hmm.
there was Stanford and there was various Defense Department budgets that funded the semiconductor companies, et cetera, and venture capital and angel investors and entrepreneurs and
Yeah.
some nice weather. And all of that came together. And so, there's like, let's say there's 17, elements or six really major elements that are really hard to recreate
Yeah.
artificially, and they happened over 100 years from the war and onwards. And they're like, okay, we're going to do this, this, and this, and we're going to have Silicon Forest in whatever,
Yeah.
somewhere.
Hmm.
And I see the same kind of thing with the digital nomad and remote work visas. It's like
Yeah.
it's the gnomes. It's like,
You've
okay, if someone wants to start the next Shopify in somewhere, in Croatia or Montenegro, or the next, maybe, that's an example from the last generation, the next big Web3 company. There's so much to it. It's like all the engineers, everybody, the designers, the
hmm
salespeople, the mentors, and it's like you can't create some of these things in a vacuum. So I'm rambling a little bit. I did want to.
No, you've really hit the nail on the head there.
Yeah.
Like I've
Yeah.
worked in that world of like startup capacity building, like ecosystem development, and my big peeve was like, oh, this city wants innovation, and so they have a budget, and what do they do with it? Is they put this shiny building somewhere
Yeah.
with like
Yeah.
offices and co-working space in an
Yeah.
area that
The
doesn't
tech
have foot
hub. Yeah.
traffic,
Yeah.
right? That people don't actually want to go, and they say, like, look, we created a tech hub. No
Yeah.
one actually wants to live there, work there. Like that,
Yeah.
what a waste of money. And
Yeah.
in the same way, I feel, yeah, I think you've really nailed it. Like a lot of countries who want to do something with digital nomads, with remote workers, the first thing that they're sort of going to is a visa, even if that's not the tool that's like right for the job.
Yeah. Um, yeah. A lot of work to do. I hope that it seems like one of the line of work that you've been in, I kind of know what it's like to, be a consultant and kind of work with organizations on these kind of strategies. It can be
Hmm.
very difficult. It's not like it's
Yeah.
not like it's not necessarily like a marketing or software development or design contract with a growing private company, a start Series A or Series B startup. If you do
Hmm.
work for a company where it's like, we need this, deliver it,
Yeah.
do this. It's kind of one of these things where not to like, yeah, I mean, it's harder sometimes to work with governments and regions on a strategy because it just works differently. So
Hmm.
I can imagine it'd be very difficult. But there is this pressure of competition. I do see kind of it's like green shoots of plants coming up out of the soil. Maybe it's like with what they are feeling economically, what happened with COVID. It does feel like countries and cities are more proactive to realize that they're competing with each other to try and get
Yeah.
this knowledge work. It's still vague. They're like, knowledge work, digital nomad,
Hmm.
remote worker, sort of piece of the pie. But I do feel this kind of competition where, 10 or 15 years ago, I don't think countries thought of themselves that way. It was more like, how do we
Yeah.
keep people out? The border has nothing to do with like economic policy. It's more just, you know, we want to keep the bad guys out or
Yeah.
whatever. Now I see it's like just the concept that they're going for these visas and allowing people to um, very quick. I shouldn't say very quickly. I know that there's a bit of a
Hmm.
process, but they're taking the step to say, yes, you can come here and work remotely, and that
Hmm.
it happened in a couple of years. It didn't happen over 15 years. It started in 2020, and now here we are in 2023. So there's some positive stuff there, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that competition thing, it's the countries who are wise to the opportunity seem to be like the smaller, more nimble ones, are the ones who just like they're shit out of luck for XYZ reason. So they're more willing to take the risk, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not without its risk. There are very specific reasons why countries control their borders the way that they do historically. Uh, but it really is the risk takers who are going to see I think something new happen. I sort of wonder what's going to happen with the followers, if there's going to be room for the followers, because I just feel like it's just such a big shift in the way you even think about it, like because you don't need to have created new visa policy for remote workers, but if half the world does, then they're the ones who are going to be sucking up all of the talent, right? Because if they make it really easy for the best, the brightest to come to them, whether that's on a short-term basis as like as a visitor, as a digital nomad, or to emigrate long-term, you know, like gosh, it's going back to that thing you said, a country is accountable to its citizens, right? But if your citizens leave you en masse, like
Hmm.
brain drain was a problem that was happening to many countries because they were so stilted in their economic development, um, that they didn't offer opportunities. So their best and brightest went to be educated in the quote unquote West, right? And a lot of them stayed there. And so those are the countries that were the winners. But now with remote work, like, yeah, it can go the other way now. And I just sort of like, do people like that? To me is just like, wow, that's completely game changing. The best and the brightest people are now going to go not to the west, but to the places that offer like a really good quality of life, the kind of place that has neighborhoods where I want to raise my kids, the place where it would be fun to be an entrepreneur and like create new opportunities, right? Like it's just a very different world. And if people are leaving your country, if people are if we all of a sudden have a pathway for people to opt out, right? Because there's that whole joke that like nothing is like inevitable in life except for death and taxes. But what if the taxes part is decoupled, right? Because actually if
Yeah.
citizenship, if like travel, if immigration is a lot more flexible, then people have the ability to opt out of the tax part. And that's the thing that countries really
Yeah.
have to be paying attention to.
Yeah, I definitely there's a lot of people in Silicon Valley, I think, right now that are like, what if we didn't have death or taxes? Let's figure
That's
those.
true. Yeah,
Let's
yeah,
let's
yeah, yeah.
solve for those
The
problems.
final
Um,
frontiers.
uh, have you gone to many digital nomad conferences, events, or festivals in the last 3 or 4 years? Do you
I
go on that circuit, the global nomad trail of
I really
events?
haven't. I just was hunkered down in Thailand during the pandemic, and then I had a baby. So I've been very settled. So I certainly, when we people were doing lots of the virtual events, oh yeah, I was quite a regular feature. But now I've just had like major FOMO. I had
Oh
a
yeah.
friend who was at like running a remote, and he was like taking selfies with all of our like mutual besties, and I was just like, oh my gosh, I wish I was there. But no, I haven't done that circuit. Have you?
I've been to running remote twice, and I was there in Lisbon.
Nice.
When was it? A month or two ago.
Hmm.
And yeah, it was great. It was in Montreal, my home country. Although I'm not from Quebec or Montreal, but it was in my home country 2 years ago. And yeah, it's an interesting mix. Running remote is an interesting mix of the enterprise best practices. So
Hmm.
companies talking about how to run remote teams. That's the core audience and of the organizers is really to bring companies in. It's not like totally like it's not a digital nomad conference.
Yeah.
Frankly, it's a remote work conference.
Yep.
But still, many digital nomad influencers and personalities and remote work thought leaders gather at remote anyway, because it's a really well run conference and there's just such a great community around it.
Yeah.
So you get this blend of, on the one hand, talking about, how Slack or GitLab manages remote async communication, enterprise thought leadership talks, and also just like digital nomads talking about where the coolest place to go is in the
Yeah.
hallways around. So I haven't gone to many besides that. I'd like to do more in the coming years. But yeah, it's interesting. Um, it's an interesting thing to think about. I've seen, I think what happened was there were more annual conferences, but then 2020 and 2021, I think it killed a lot of them, unfortunately.
Oh yeah.
So I don't know how good they were in the first place. I can't say, all of them were great, but it doesn't seem like there's as many now. And it seems like there's an opportunity probably for more of them, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Similar to everyone reaching for the digital nomad visa, like in their tool in their kit, and not every problem requires a hammer. I've seen a lot. It seems like every country wants to do their own digital nomad festival, and I
Mhm.
was speaking to some folks in Thailand who, again, we wanted to do the same thing. We're like, travel is opening up again. We want the digital nomads to come here. For me personally, I was deep in like the newborn baby world, and so that was like beyond my capacity. Even though I was like, FOMO, it kills me to let go of this opportunity. It would be so perfect, but I had to pass it by. But now that I've seen it's been a year or two of seeing many different countries launch these. It's been a good opportunity to think like, okay, well, how do you differentiate? Like, how do you do something more than just like slap digital nomad festival like on the headline and say digital nomads come here? Like, because the movement has grown so
Mhm.
much, and it's like there's actually a lot of different angles to work in. There's a lot of different like communities, like sub communities to sort of support. Like I went to the nomad summit, like the last one, I guess, in Chiang Mai in 2020, That's actually when I connected with the Safety Wing folks and the stuff that became Plumia. But my takeaway from that was a lot of folks really enjoyed the first time they went when they were like newbies and they wanted to learn how to live the lifestyle, but it didn't really offer a lot of value to folks who were more seasoned nomads who had sort of figured out some of the entrepreneurship stuff, how to figure out the logistics stuff. And so that there was like, okay, I sort of took a lesson from that, that like, okay, maybe this is sort of like in the events conferences space, that's kind of an underserved population perhaps. So I sort of kept that mental note. But yeah, just think about how to differentiate, hey, I don't know if you want to like go to Thailand next year, but trying to see if like we can do something in Thailand. And that's really been on my mind, like what's a way to highlight the destination and differentiate, like, because you don't want to just do the exact same, like, do you necessarily want to do the exact same gathering in all these different places and it just feels super generic, or do you want to really highlight something like in the locality, something that's like really like unique? I don't know. There's something
Yeah,
there.
no, that's a good segue into maybe ending this off. And I've got kind of a not like a lightning round question. It's a very easy question,
Yeah.
but it's a personal question, personal request. So basically, through all of this, I feel like I do know North America and some parts of Central America, specifically Costa Rica and Europe, pretty well. And I've been to Brazil, so I have a decent tracker. It's not a contest, but I have
Hmm.
a decent just horizons expanded in various places. But I have never been to East or Southeast Asia.
Ah.
I don't want to say I don't want to say I've never been to Asia, because I have been to Dubai, but that's quite a that's a different place. And
Yeah.
so basically all of East and Southeast Asia, including India and a lot of places, I have simply never been. And so in 2024, knock on wood, I would like to nomad or remote work there
Yeah.
at some point. So nowadays, I know the history of, like, Canggu or places were popular before the pandemic, during the pandemic, maybe still popular now. But if it was like a 2024 traveler, let's say I allot 2 months, dip a toe, maybe even 1 or 2 months. What do you think are the best places to go? And assume, like, I can't go a different place every 4 days. I'm not. I
Yeah.
ain't. I
Yeah. Yeah.
ain't
Yeah.
doing that. I ain't doing that. If I was gonna go 1 or 2 places, three is a stretch. What would
Hmm.
be the places to check out for the first Asian nomad journey?
Yeah. Well, if you're coming to my neck of the woods, I recommend organizing a long layover in Tokyo. I did that on the way over here to Vancouver, and I think Tokyo is such a fun city. So if you can do that as a travel hack,
That's a
that's
great
great.
idea.
And then, yeah, come to Thailand. I think you got to give Thailand like a full month at least. Uh, Bangkok, it's like some people love it, some people hate it. So leave your itinerary loose, and then you got to come up north to Chiang Mai, my hometown, and hang out, see why it's one of the OG nomad hotspots. I think it still has a lot to offer. Come say hi to me and hang out. I love meeting my internet friends in real life. And then definitely hit up Gophangan in the south as well. I think KP's got its own very unique magic and a really great community down there as well. And I was recently in Hoi An in Vietnam. We entirely skipped Da Nang, and I think there's some good folks in Da Nang, but and I think if you want to like connect with the tech scene in Vietnam there, then maybe there's more there. But we went straight to Hoi An, which is like 30 minutes away, and it's just beautiful, really lovely place. My friend there runs like the local co-working space, like Hub Hoi An, and it's just a really nice vibe. You get a chance to sort of like, he's got this co-working space that's like set right in the middle of like rice fields, and so it's just a nice view, and I think really a good chance to sort of dig into the local culture. So I would definitely say those, and I think it's worth stopping in Singapore as well,
Hmm.
like as because I think it's a good chance to see sort of how like a big developed like city can be done like Asian style, but still Southeast Asia. Like I love, like, Singapore is very developed and very structured, but there's still a little bit of like the sort of Southeast Asia, just like chaos, wildness to it in certain parts, at least with like the cuisine, I think still comes through. You can like go eat at like the hawker stalls and sort of see like this melange of like cuisines and cultures that have like mixed it up there. So maybe that's my itinerary to
Yeah.
recommend to you.
Yeah, no, that's a great itinerary. I'm going to listen back to this and actually write that down and hopefully
Yay.
do that itinerary. You know, even in this world of Chat GPT, it's still nice to ask a real expert human for an answer
Yeah.
instead of just cheating with the AI and just saying, give me an itinerary for Southeast Asia. You know, you are a travel guide. You
Yeah.
know,
But you know what like ChatGPT is great at is like optimizing.
yeah,
You know, if you give it like I have this many days and I don't want to drive for more than so and so and I don't want flights for such and such, like, oh, it's so great for
yeah.
that.
No, it is
Love
good. I'm only making fun of it because I use it too much.
it.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's good. Well, maybe next time we record, I I said earlier like we're close by, so I don't you are in Vancouver right now, and I'm in Victoria on Vancouver Island.
Hmm.
I don't know why I said I was. I think I said I was like a 15-minute helicopter ride away. I don't know why I said it like that.
Do you
Like I'm
regularly
a
travel
some
by helicopter,
yeah, like
sir?
I'm some character from Succession, one of the Roys. Like, yeah, I'm a helicopter ride away. It's actually more like a 3-hour trip to
Yeah.
take a ferry, like a normal person. There are
Hmm.
there are seaplanes. I've noticed inflation though. Is I don't know if you've ever come to the island, but there are seaplanes that go and they are more like the 20-minute seaplane ride or half
Mm,
an hour seaplane ride. I've seen inflation rearing its ugly head,
gosh.
and something that used to be $130 is now $280, and so the ferry is like $20, and you can walk on, and it's a little longer, but it's a classic British
Yeah.
Columbia trip is to take the ferry to either Vancouver Island or some of the other islands around here. So if you get a chance to do that, that
Yeah.
is great, a good thing to do in BC. But maybe next time we'll be chatting in person for a pod in
Hmm.
Southeast Asia.
That would be very fun.
Well, thanks, Lily. It's been great to have you on the Remotely Serious pod, and we'll see you on the Nomad Trail.
Thanks, Curtis. It's been fun sort of, yeah, wandering around with a couple different topics with you. Thanks for having me on.